Hi, I'm Tom Stone, and it's my pleasure to welcome all of you to this presentation about what's missing from most spiritual development programs. And we've got a PowerPoint with the various sequence of ideas that I want to share in that order. So I'm going to go ahead and do a screen share and open up the PowerPoint, and we'll just kind of use that as a general thing that I'm going to follow. So here's the screen share. Okay, so what's missing in most spiritual development teachings? So have you tried to improve your consciousness and spirituality from some supposedly enlightened teachers and been disappointed or even frustrated? Now, I've talked to a lot of people who've had this experience, so you may have gone through it yourself. Can you relate to this person? I'm going to kind of quote someone speaking here. I have read lots of books about spiritual enlightenment and listened to lectures by their authors. Some of them clearly describe having a genuine spiritual awakening. I've tried the techniques and practices that are recommended, if there are any, but so far nothing has really worked. I haven't found much benefit, much increase in my level of awareness, or in the reduction of problems in my life from trying lots of approaches. Overall, I must say that I haven't found anything that seems to really be helping me gain enlightenment. My experience is that none of these teachers offer a simple, systematic method that guides you in exactly how to get rid of the primary barriers to enlightenment. For example, one teacher gave the instruction to only notice and act on your positive thoughts and notice but don't act on negative thoughts. I tried my best to do it, but I didn't see much improvement and still seemed to have plenty of negative thoughts. The many teachers I've read or listened to seem to mostly talk about what an enlightened state of being is like. They don't say much about how to gain that enlightened state for yourself. This is the main thing missing from all of these spiritual development teachings. Now, some of the things that I'm going to share with you in this presentation may be hard to hear for various reasons. For example, you may have a kind of devotion to your teacher or to your spiritual practice. Some people have that. You may have the idea that if you just persevere with what you're currently doing, that you will eventually get to your goal of having a true awakening. Or you may think that what I'm telling you is too simple. How could it possibly work? Or you may have come to believe that widely held belief that spiritual development is difficult and it has to take a long time. Certainly, if you're doing something that doesn't work, it will definitely take a long time. But what I'm going to do is to explain to you in what the essence of what's missing from most spiritual practices is, and even why it is missing. But even more importantly, I'm going to tell you how you can get what you have been longing for all of your life. I've had the great good fortune to discover it, but I had to go through an extraordinary experience of getting shot in the chest by a deranged stranger in order to make this discovery. I survived it, but I had PTSD as a result of this attack. And I searched for and found an insight that allowed me to completely cure the PTSD. It took all of that to discover the simple insights that led to a full awakening of the continuous experience of wholeness, pure awareness. So I invite you to listen with an open mind to the best of your ability to do that, and just set aside your previous notions about what spiritual development is. You might just find what your heart has been longing to find your whole life. That's what so many people say who listen to what I'm going to share with you here. So fasten your seatbelt. Here we go. Another way to understand what's missing is that without knowing it, you're lost to having a sense of being separate, a separate, isolated individual. In this context, lost to means that you don't know that you don't know. Many people are living mainly as the product of their conditioning. The conditioning that creates the feeling of separateness, and they're unaware that this is happening. This means that you're deeply conditioned to live inside of illusions of separateness. The reason you do that is that you have a very deep conditioning of suppressing and avoiding unresolved emotional pain. When something emotionally painful happens, you get overwhelmed. You just can't process all the emotional pain right when it happens. It's just too much. And when you can't process it all in the moment, you archive it and it accumulates. You learned to suppress and avoid your emotional pain in very early childhood. And you got so good at it that you continue to do it frequently without even knowing that you're doing it. So how does the accumulated residual emotional pain affect your thinking, your decisions, your actions, and experiences? It results in collecting two databases of unresolved disruptive emotions. One of these databases is the unresolved pain. Think of it as the collection of your incomplete emotional experiences. The other database is what are called reactive emotions. And here's a chart showing how this accumulation creates these two databases of emotional energies. This is called the types of emotions chart. And you can see on the left, we have useful emotions, and on the right, we have unresolved and not useful. And so the useful emotions are energizing and empowering, things like love, compassion, happiness, joy, but even fear can be useful. If we're about to step out into the street and a new Tesla car is coming, not making any noise, electric car, and you just catch it, that you see it right at the last minute, the fear causes you to jump back, and this, of course, saves you from getting injured. So even fear and other things that we would normally think of as, quote, negative emotions can be useful. So over on the right, on the unresolved side, the not useful side, these are emotions that are disruptive and depleting. And the arrow that comes down to the left is, there are two categories. The first one is painful internal emotional energies. This is like trauma, emotional pain, heartbreak, resentment, grief. The list goes on and on. And you'll see just to the right of that, a little body picture and a little red dot right at about the solar plexus area. And this is just a kind of graphic representation. Everyone knows this kind of experience. These are localized, constricted energies that feel like a knot or ball of constriction, and they're held inside the body. And the word in underneath the image of the person is because we use a technique called the in technique to resolve this kind of energy. So this is one of the structures or one of the patterns, that categories of patterns that unresolved emotional energy can take. On the right side, we have this other bigger circle, reactive external emotions. And this category has a completely different kind of energy pattern to the in techniques. And it has two subcategories. And these categories are both caused by projecting positive or negative outcomes onto the future. When you project a positive outcome onto the future, we call that an expectation. And when an expectation that you have doesn't get met, what's the common experience for most people? You get upset in some way. You get angry, disappointed, frustrated, sad, depressed, and again, the list goes on and on. Now, if you're projecting a possible negative outcome in the future, worried that something bad might happen, this, of course, is a different category. It's fear, worry, anxiety, panic attacks, and so forth. However, the cloud of energy that radiates out from the body and fills up the space around you, as in the graphic, this is common for both the upset and the fear subcategories. They all are producing this kind of cloud or aura of energy that surrounds and engulfs you. And we use a technique called the out technique for this, which is why that word is there. So this shows the structure of the internal and external patterns of energy associated with these two categories of not useful emotions. So the incomplete experiences of emotional pain that you couldn't fully process when they happened are energies held in your body as localized constricted feelings. Everyone has lots of these energies held in their body, and we refer to them, as mentioned, as in-technique energies, because that's the name of the technique that you use in order to resolve them. The other database of unresolved emotions is called reactive emotions, and we refer to these unresolved disruptive energy patterns as out-technique energies. And just as on the types of emotions chart, you can see there's an image, and the energy radiates out, fills up the space around you. Everyone has lots of these reactive emotions too, and it's a bit like having dark glasses on. You kind of see through the type of energy that is being generated out of the story that's going on. And this kind of story, the thoughts that are caused by the unresolved emotional pain of this kind, we call them emotional pain-based thoughts or ego-based thoughts. These are the two categories of emotions that we generate that cause this kind of actually, if I back up here, it's more accurate to say that the emotional pain-based thoughts are typically more associated with the in-technique energies, and the ego-based thoughts are more associated with the reactive emotions. In addition to the ego-based and emotional pain-based thoughts, you also have practical thoughts and intuitive thoughts. Practical thoughts and intuitive thoughts don't have any disruptive emotional energies at their basis, whereas the ego and emotionally pain-based thoughts do have disruptive emotional energies at their basis. Now, you're typically not aware of the presence of these disruptive emotions because they're so deeply suppressed. In addition, you've been living with all four of these kinds of thoughts all your life, so they're all very familiar to you. And you've also haven't known that it is possible to distinguish the useful ones from the not useful ones. And more importantly, you haven't known that there are a couple of simple techniques for easily and quickly finding and resolving the disruptive emotions at the basis of your ego and emotional pain-based thoughts. This is a phenomenal development. Now, how is it that I can know this and I can talk about it so confidently? It's because back in 1993, I went to answer my front door and I got shot in the chest by a deranged stranger right at my front door. He had a big handgun. He pulled it out from behind his back, shot through the oval decorative glass of the door, and the bullet hit me right to the left side of my right nipple, glanced off of a lower edge of the rib there, and went down through my diaphragm, right between the two lobes of the liver, through the psoas muscle, hit the pelvic bone, and lodged right behind my fifth lumbar vertebra. So in addition to a couple of surgeries, first one to repair what the bullet had gone through, and a couple months later, another surgery going in through the backside to remove part of the fifth lumbar and get the bullet out of the bone where it was embedded. In addition to the physical recovery, I had PTSD as a result of this whole experience with all of the symptoms: nightmares, flashbacks, startle response, hypervigilance, pretty much every PTSD symptom. I didn't believe the psychological dogma that PTSD is incurable. So I intuitively felt they must be missing something, and I started to do my own private research to see if I could find some way to cure the PTSD. It took a while to find the answer I was looking for, but I was very fortunate to discover a simple insight that allowed me to cure my PTSD completely. All the PTSD symptoms disappeared within a few days, and I haven't had any PTSD symptoms for over 25 years. I'd call that a cure. So my insight was very simple. It's so simple that I can see why the whole medical and psychological profession, scientific community, I can see why they missed it. And I'd imagine you'd like me to share that insight with you. Well, I'm going to tell it to you. And here it is. When we're very young, we all get emotionally overwhelmed lots and lots of times. Nobody likes it. In fact, we hate it. And we rapidly learn to do everything we can to avoid getting emotionally overwhelmed. So we learn to suppress and avoid emotional pain as much as possible. And this happens even before we learn how to speak. So you could say it's kind of pre-verbal conditioning. We get so good at suppressing emotional pain that we do it automatically without even being aware that we're doing it. The consequence of this is that we accumulate a database of unresolved emotional pain and continue to accumulate more of it throughout our life. When we have an emotional, painful experience, we often can't process all the energy of the pain, so we archive some of it in our body. And we hate having to feel that pain, so we put it off until later, basically, to hide it deeply so it's really suppressed, hoping that maybe we won't ever have to feel it. But it doesn't get rid of it. It is still in there, waiting to be completed and go through a process of feeling it until it's really gone. This is a setup for becoming emotionally incompetent. And this is true for pretty much everybody on the planet. And you know very well from just your interactions with other people, and even some of your own experiences, that basically most people don't know how to handle their emotions very well at all. The database of emotional pain is so well suppressed that we don't realize that it's even there. We don't realize that many of our thoughts are caused by the unresolved painful energies of the suppressed emotions. When you want to change, you need to dedicate yourself to making the desired change, but you also need to understand what's really going on and what to do about it. We need the knowledge of how to make the change. The thing that causes it to be difficult to distinguish between useful and not useful thoughts requires more than just being told to notice and favor your useful thoughts. People can't do that. The generating of negative thoughts is a deeply conditioned way of being. And the conditioning is so powerful, you can't change it by just deciding that you want to or thinking that you're going to. The conditioning will always win. It's too well entrenched. To be aware of the difference between useful and not useful thoughts, and to only act on the useful ones and not act on the not useful ones, requires an ability to make conscious something that has been unconscious. People are not conscious of this difference. This is because you've been having both useful and not useful thoughts your whole life. And as a result, you tend to not be fully aware of it when you have them. This is a deeply conditioned habit. And the unresolved emotional energy that's at the basis of the not useful thoughts is so well suppressed that you don't even realize that there is emotional energy at the root of such thoughts. It seems like all your thoughts are just normal because that's just how it's been your whole life. Is there a solution to this problem? Fortunately, there is. The ability to consistently determine if there is residual emotional energy at the root of a given thought can be greatly enhanced with muscle testing and the pure awareness techniques. I'm going to tell you about both of those. There are two parts to making a change from not being aware of something to becoming aware of it. One part is intellectually understanding that gaining this awareness is an essential and important part of becoming a fully realized conscious being. The second part is knowing that there is a reason why you are not sufficiently aware of your not useful thoughts. And this is caused by conditioning. This conditioning comes from having ego-based and emotional pain-based thoughts all your life without realizing that this is happening. This makes the ego-based thoughts and emotional pain-based thoughts seem as if they're just a natural part of human experience. Here's a short video of some psychologists talking about the problem of the ego being so difficult to recognize.
The ego is the worst confidence trickster we could ever figure, we could ever imagine, because you don't see it.
And the single biggest con is, I am you.
The problem is that the ego hides in the last place that you'd ever look, within itself.
It disguises its thoughts as your thoughts, its feelings as your feelings. You think it's you.
People's need to protect their own egos knows no bounds. They will lie, cheat, steal, kill, do whatever it takes to maintain what we call ego boundaries.
People have no clue that they're in prison. They don't know that there is an ego. They don't know the distinction.
At first, it's difficult for the mind to accept that there's something beyond itself, that there's something of greater value and greater capacity for discerning truth than itself.
In religion, the ego manifests as the devil. And of course, no one realizes how smart the ego is, because it created the devil so you could blame someone else.
In creating this imaginary external enemy, we usually made a real enemy for ourselves. And that becomes a real danger to the ego, but that's also the ego's creation.
There is no such thing as an external enemy, no matter what that voice in your head is telling you. All perception of an enemy is a projection of the ego as the enemy.
In that sense, you could say that 100% of our external enemies are of our own creation.
Your greatest enemy is your own inner perception, is your own ignorance, is your own ego.
So these psychology experts seem to understand the problem, but they don't offer any solution. And in fact, they talk about it as if there isn't a solution. They seem to believe that not being aware of the ego and its influences is just the way that human beings are. Although this phenomenon is very common, it is not natural. This is because of the epigenetic phenomena of the conditioning of emotional suppression that originates during very early childhood. It's in very early childhood, everyone gets emotionally overwhelmed easily and often, and no one likes to have this experience. It causes them to experience pain and to feel a sense of separateness from everything. The common result of having this happen is that one attempts to not have to have the common result of having this happen is that one attempts to not have it happen by suppressing and avoiding such experiences as much as possible. This happens again and again when we're very young, and it happens before we learn how to speak. We make a decision that doesn't even have words associated with it. We decide to just put a lid on it and stuff the emotional pain down inside our body. But the decision to suppress and avoid painful feelings as much as possible is pretty much a universal, deeply entrenched phenomenon. The decision is not coming from our DNA, so it's not like a natural part of us. It's coming from an epigenetic influence that is deeply conditioned, which is caused by the repeated reaction to being so frequently emotionally overwhelmed during our preverbal development. It's a learned behavior that is extremely common, but it's not an innate part of being human. Because it is a learned behavior, it can also be unlearned. This unlearning process starts with becoming aware that this is a deeply conditioned way of being. You then need to understand the mechanics of what's really going on. This is the part that most people don't know. Most people think that when they successfully suppress emotional pain, that it is gone. But it's not gone. It's just suppressed and the energy is still held in the body. What we're really looking for is the distinction between suppression and completion. These are as different as day and night. When you complete the experience of an energy, of an emotion, it's really gone. It doesn't come back. And when you suppress an emotional energy, the residual energy is still held in the body. Completion really gets rid of it. Suppression only masks it and continues to hold on to it. People don't know about this because the habit of suppression is so widely shared. Few people know this distinction between suppression and completion. They don't know that completion is even an option. To just be told that you need to favor your positive thoughts and avoid acting on your negative thoughts can only be an effective and workable process for people who already have a pretty high level of being conscious. Telling someone who is not conscious enough to notice the distinction between positive and negative thoughts will in most cases not be sufficient. It won't necessarily really help them to notice when they're having ego-based and emotional pain-based thoughts. This is because the disruptive emotional energy that is at the inception of such thoughts has been so well suppressed that most people don't know that it's there. Having ego-based and emotional pain-based thoughts has been happening all your life. Having such thoughts seems like it's just a normal part of life. What is needed is to make something that is deeply unconscious conscious. There is a way to do that, and it's called the freedom practice. It's a simple and systematic process of making the unconscious conscious. In the freedom practice, you learn how to do a simple technique called muscle testing, as mentioned earlier. Muscle testing involves learning how to check for a certain kind of response from your muscles. You say or think an intention, and then test with your fingers to see if the response of your fingers is a strong or weak response. The strong response of the muscle is used as an indication that there's a congruence between your intention and your direct experience. For example, if I say, or if you say, I am a man, then you challenge the muscles of your fingers in a particular way, and you'll get a strong response from this kind of muscle test. However, if you are a man and you test for the intention, I am a woman, then you challenge the muscles of your fingers in the same way as before, and you'll get a weak response from the muscle because there's not a congruence between what you're saying and what's in your direct experience. It takes a bit of guidance and practice to learn to do the muscle testing process correctly so that you get a good, clear distinction between the strong and weak responses. That's because you're not used to using your muscles as a method of comparing your cognitive and experiential data to see if they're congruent or not. This means it's a way to clarify if your intellectual thinking and your experiential knowing are in alignment or not. When done properly, the muscle testing can be used to help you determine if there is some suppressed disruptive emotional energy stored in your body that's causing you to have ego-based or emotionally pain-based thoughts. This can help you to clarify the influence of your decisions of the four main kinds of thoughts that you have. The four main kinds of decision-influencing thoughts you have are, number one, practical thoughts, 2, intuitive thoughts, 3, ego-based thoughts, and 4, emotional pain-based thoughts. Practical and intuitive thoughts don't have any emotional charge to them. Ego-based thoughts and emotional pain-based thoughts are caused by suppressed emotional energies. In the freedom practice, use muscle testing to determine which kind of influence on your decisions a particular thought will have. If a thought is practical or intuitive, the influence that thought has on your decisions and actions will be positive. If, on the other hand, you use the muscle testing and determine that the thought is ego-based or emotionally pain-based, then this is a thought not to be acted on, as the influence will be negative. Being able to determine if a thought is going to have a positive or negative influence on your decisions and actions is much better than not knowing this. However, this is only the beginning of the freedom practice process. Once you know that a thought is practical or intuitive, you can pursue the decisions and actions of that thought with confidence that you will have a positive outcome. I think of it as remembering the future. But if a thought is ego-based or emotionally pain-based, you get to know ahead of time that pursuing decisions and actions based on that thought will not be productive. Acting on such thoughts will almost certainly lead to costly mistakes. People who are successful commonly say that their success comes largely from following their intuition. Here are a few examples of quotes about this from successful people. Follow your instincts. That's where true wisdom manifests itself. Oprah Winfrey, who all of you know is a famous TV talk show host. Have the courage to follow your heart and intuition. They somehow already know what you truly want to become. Everything else is secondary. Steve Jobs, the founder of Apple Computer. And this one, the only real valuable thing is intuition. Albert Einstein, as you know, a famous scientist. Although these successful people somehow know how to trust and act on their intuition more than the majority of people, they don't provide any instructions for how you can do that too. The muscle testing technique can become a systematic method of making conscious something that is very commonly unconscious. This means that it's a method of seeing if there's a match or if there's a mismatch between the cognitive data from your mind and the experiential data from your body. When there is a match, it means that there's a congruence between your mental thinking and your experiential knowing. If there's not a match, it means that there is some disruptive emotional energy at the root of the thought that you're having. You also use the muscle testing to determine which of the pure awareness techniques to use to resolve the disruptive emotional energy. There are two pure awareness techniques for doing this. They're called simply the in technique and the out technique, as shown above on the types of emotions chart. Once you know whether you're looking for in or out technique energy, you then use a technique called the locate technique to find where the energy is being stored in or around the body. The in technique energies, you can notice some constricted feeling. It feels like a tight knot or ball of energy inside, as I mentioned before. And if you bring your awareness closer to that sensation, you can sense where the strongest part of the energy field is, which is usually right in the center of the field. Without technique energies, the field surrounds and engulfs you. You see life through this field, which colors what you see with whatever quality of unresolved reactive emotions you have. It's a bit like having emotional dark glasses on. The in technique energies are inside of you. The out technique energies, you're inside of the energy field, which is like a mist or cloud that engulfs you. Doing the out technique is like taking off the dark glasses and finally being able to see things as they really are. And when you get outside the energy cloud, you experience your awareness that is the essence of what you really are. Learning and doing the in and out techniques is the fast track to cleaning up your inner emotional landscape so that you naturally live in pure awareness all the time. This is a genuine experience of enlightenment. It's not just talking about it or describing it. It's the way to truly live it permanently. So I strongly recommend you to learn the freedom practice. I'm confident that you will finally give you what you want, what you've been looking for. If you find the webpage about it here at innergreatnessglobal.com/the freedom practice with hyphens. I'll leave this up for a little bit, so if you want to write it down, you can. So thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed it, and certainly am open to answer any questions you may have. If you have a question, you can just unmute and ask it. Okay, looks like we answered all the questions already. Very good. So thank you so much for coming and being part of this. It's much more fun to speak to an audience than just to speak to a camera. So I appreciate it very much. And glad you enjoyed it. Thanks, good thumbs up. Appreciate that. And I've already given one class where we did a bunch of demonstrations of identifying and resolving energies using a new process called the waveform optimizing. And I'm going to do that again. And I'm also going to do that privately with some of the people who like Kristen and Kaylin. Yeah. And so be my pleasure to do that. I've sent you an email about that, so you can just reply and we can set up a time. Yeah, that'll be great. So thank you again for joining me. I really appreciate it. Have a wonderful evening and look forward to seeing you very soon. All the best. Bye-bye.